Welcome to Sport SA Daily Diary. Today we'll be chatting to ex-Bafana Bafana defensive linchpin, Matthew Booth. Good morning, Matthew. How are you doing today and in this lockdown that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, thanks. I'm coping as well as can be. It's difficult not being able to get out and exercise and get my gym regimen going. But other than that, we coping.
Oh, I'm sure. What have you been doing? Just trying to stay fit and stay active?
Well, we've got a place on the patio which we've made as the family exercise area. So we do a lot of skipping and abs and just general exercises that we can do in a smallish space. Other than that, not much cardio, to be honest, which is what I really live for. So it's a little bit difficult. And then I've got a lot of chores to do around the house, so there's no excuse to run away from them now. I'm getting stuck into that.
Absolutely. There have been quite a few of those memes going around about those things that your wife has been asking you to do for ages, but you just haven't had the time.
Yeah, there's no excuse now whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. Matthew, it's great to chat to you. And I could chat to you about football all day, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you. You started your career in Fishhook. My parents actually live in Fishhook. That's quite a small little place for somebody to have made a career that you've made, huh?
Yeah, well, the valley which includes Ocean View and Masiphumelele and Fishhook, Noordhoek and Kommetjie, it's a fantastic valley for kids to have been brought up in. It's kind of stuck out of the way, and so it's not easy to poach talent. So basically, the talent remains in that valley, and there's a number of fantastic athletes. Business people, entertainers who have come from that valley. And I remember going to the Olympics in 2000, and we had 3 Olympians from my school.
Really? Huh?
From my school. So one was a hockey player, another was a baseball player. So there's a variety of great talent that comes out of that area, which naturally I'm quite proud of.
Yeah, definitely. I wasn't aware of it. That's amazing. And Matthew, you started playing at a very young age. Huh? You were 5 when you joined Fishhook football team.
Yeah, that's right. My school at that time didn't offer football, so I played cricket and rugby and table tennis, anything with a ball really. So I had to get my football fix at the local AFC, Fishhook AFC, and they were established in 1930, so it's a well-established institution that's still going very strong there. And yeah, I started when I was 5 years old and ended up leaving when I was 17.
Okay, so you were picked up per se by Cape Town Spurs and Richard Gomez. Tell us about that. That must have been quite a moment in your career, a sort of feather in your cap.
Yeah, so there's a very prestigious youth tournament called the Bay Hill Tournament in Cape Town, which is hosted in Cape Town. And when I played for Fishhook, we got invited. We had a pretty decent team at that stage. And that's where I got spotted by Cape Town Spurs, who were being coached by Mish de Avray at the time. And the following year, in my matric year, I signed a junior contract with Cape Town Spurs. And that's how I started my journey as a pro.
And from there, you went on to Sundowns. You had over 100 caps with Sundowns. You won 2 leagues with them. I mean, that must have been an awesome time for you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I cut my teeth at Cape Town Spurs with some fantastic professionals who taught me my trade. And then to get a big move to Sundowns was incredible. They had just won 2 league titles in a row. And when I arrived, we won our 3rd. In fact, we won a double there. We won the Rothmans Cup and the league in that year. So it was a great start to my career at Sundowns. And shortly after that, getting to the African Champions League final in 2001, that was the cherry on top. Unfortunately, weren't able to win it, but certainly those 3 years at Sundowns before I left for Russia were incredible. I played with some of the best players in South Africa at that stage, and it was just I was in awe of the players that I was surrounded by.
And what made you head over to Russia, Matthew? I mean, that's a very different, it's a whole different world, really. Different style of football, different country, different weather. I mean, it must have been quite something to adapt to, first of all.
Yeah, well, while I was at Spurs and at Sundowns, I'd been on a number of trials, and for a number of reasons, it didn't go through with regards moving to a more established league. Either the week I had a poor week or I had a good week, but the club asked for too much, or just it didn't go for me. So it came to a point in my career where I decided, look, I've got to make the move to Europe. Beggars can't be choosers, and I decided to get out of my comfort zone. And at the stage, we were coached by Viktor Bondarenko, who hails from a southern town called Rostov-on-Don in Russia, and he initiated this move for me and one of my colleagues to go to Russia. I didn't know anything about the league. I didn't know anything about the country, besides the basic stereotypes that you hear about from Russia. So it was really a big move for me and a big risk.
I mean, it must have been a huge adjustment. I went to Russia when Man United beat Chelsea in the Champions League final, and there's literally no English. The road signs are all in their alphabet. The taxi drivers don't speak English. It's not as if you're just moving from here to the UK or one of the other European leagues. How did you adjust to that? And as well, I'd be very interested from a sporting perspective is how do you communicate with your teammates when there's probably very little in the team at all?
Yeah, no, you're right. There was no English whatsoever. I moved in 2002 and I left in 2008, and I saw a remarkable change during that time. They were spending a lot of their petrodollars on the league and trying to up the prestige of the league. So I ended up playing with some great players, but initially it was a huge culture shock. But I can recommend it for any youngster, no matter what industry you're in, is to be able to get out of your comfort zone, learn a new language, come back to an apartment, an empty apartment. You've had a tired training session. It's freezing. It's minus 10 outside. Just from a character building perspective, any professional, I would highly recommend it, because you become educated on so many different levels and a lot more mature and independent. And not enough of the young professionals in South Africa, from a football point of view, take up that opportunity, because they get into a kind of a comfort zone here in the Premier League, earning good money, being a big fish in a small pond. And just from a progress point of view, I would highly recommend doing what I did.
Yeah. And Matthew, you've had great success with the national team as well. You played under 20s, under 23, and obviously before for Bafana. Was that sort of the pinnacle of your career, the proudest moment representing your country?
Yeah, I've had a couple of disappointing moments, but certainly my highlights would include, I was part of a junior national team who ended up being pioneers. We were the first to qualify for intercontinental tournaments in '97. And then with the same core of that team, we were the first to qualify for an Olympics in Sydney 2000. Yeah. And I think in those three group games, everybody still talks about the Brazil game where we beat Brazil 3-1. I think that was probably one of my better games that I played. But typical South African team, we lost to Japan and Slovakia, so weren't able to but that will certainly stand out. And then, of course, being involved in the 2009 Confederations Cup, also being part of a squad in 2010, I was disappointed not to have played, but extremely fortunate to have been part of that whole squad and the build up to the 2010 World Cup.
Yeah. And Matthew, I mean, I think there's two very iconic sportsmen in South Africa, and you are one, and Beast is the other. And for a particular reason is the support that you get. During the Confed Cup, I took my wife to one of the games, and you were playing, and all the fans were going Booth, 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 and my wife kept on saying to me, why are they booing the white guy? What's going on? How did that come about? Do you know how that came about, and how did it make you feel hearing a stadium of 60,000 people all going Booth, Booth? I mean, that must be something quite special.
I remember one of the referees, I think it was in the Spanish game, actually came up to me in the heat of the moment during the game and asked me why is the crowd booing me? So I didn't have enough time to explain to him. I just showed him the back of my shirt. I think he understood. But yeah, it's a tradition amongst local football fans. Football fans in South Africa are divided. You get the local fans, and then you get fans who follow European football. So the local fans will understand that it's tradition. There's a number of other players who've had the honor of having the crowd chant their names. Lucas, Roo, Khadebe, Mark Fish, John Shoes, Moshweo, all had similar chants, whether it was because of their nickname or because of their surname. So I always knew what it was about. It was kind of a double-edged sword. Whenever I had a bad game, whether they would boo me or not, I kind of felt quite fortunate. So, but yeah, it's a great thing, and I've seen it happen to Beast as well. A couple of English players in the EPL, Robert Huth, etc. A couple of them had it done, but it's definitely a South African football tradition.
Yeah. I think what I really love about South African football, and I was chatting to Stanton about it the other day, is the camaraderie between opposing fans. The fact that you can actually go and sit with the opposition and enjoy a game. Was Russia, I presume Russia wasn't like that, because the rivalry there is quite intense, I believe.
Yeah, no, it's very tribal. European football, there's a certain age and history and rivalry that dates back 150 years. So unfortunately in South Africa we don't have that kind of history because of historically it just hasn't been that way. And in Russia there was a small section for the away fans, and it was kind of like being in a prison with these high fences and barbed wire, and the military and police were surrounded them. They're very militaristic, and in some of the bigger cities there is a slight right-wing fascist edge to some of their fans, but I think you get that in most European countries, to be honest.
Yeah. And when you came back from Russia, you played for a couple of clubs here. You were player of the season with Ajax in 2013, and then moved to Wits the following season. Was that how did that work for you? I mean, it must have been a great privilege to be player of the season, but then you sort of were off immediately after it.
Yeah, so I was coming towards the end of my career, and I'd had a very bad injury at Sundowns, my second stint at Sundowns. While I was still injured, they didn't renew my contract, which was not a particularly great moment for me. I was rather disappointed in the way that they treated me, but I then had to look for a club at my age, at the age of about, I was about 33, 32, 33. I was still injured, and now I had to look for a new club, which wasn't a great position for me. So I made the move to Ajax. They took a bit of a gamble on me. They did my rehab and looked after me very well. So I had a very good 2 seasons at Ajax, got my form back. And with most defenders, you actually peak at around 30. Just from an experience point of view, you've seen it all before. You know what's coming. You're able to read the game better. So I really enjoyed my time down there in Cape Town. And then it was more of a family decision in 2014 to move back to Johannesburg and to have one last season with Wits. I did have another extension with Wits, and they were keen to extend it, but I got to a stage where I was waking up in the morning with aches and pains from a variety of operations and ankles and knees that hadn't healed fully. And I just decided that I'd really had enough of the daily monotony and routine of training. I could still play games. I still get a buzz out of playing games, but it was just the daily monotony of going to training that really got to me. From a physical point of view, my body was not able to take it anymore. So that was the reason why I decided to retire at that stage.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you had been playing since you were 5, so that's justified, I suppose. You chat about peaking at the age of 30 and reading the game. What do you think were your most important attributes as a defender? Obviously, you've got your height. That's a no-brainer. Other than that, what do you think was your best attribute as a classy central defender that you were?
Yeah, look, defensively, when you go up for a header, you have the advantage over the attacker. So I felt that was a strong point of mine. There were very few attackers that could beat me in the air defensively. Attacking wise, I felt I should have scored more goals from set pieces, and whenever I went up for corners and set pieces. I regret not scoring more goals. But I think my best attribute was coming to terms with my weaknesses. Obviously, being nearly 2 meters tall, I was never going to be the quickest. So I had to adapt my game, and I had to read the game well. So I had to guess what the opponent was going to do a couple of seconds before he even attempted it. And that gave me a head start on the pitch. And so anticipation was very key to my game, and that's what I always worked on. And like most defenders, because you've eventually seen it all, you've seen every single scenario that could possibly occur, you're able to read the game better.
Yeah. And Matthew, who would you say has been the most influential person in your career? Whether it be a coach or a parent or whoever, who do you think's had the biggest impact on the rise of Matthew Booth?
Yeah, I think my dad, when I was younger, he spent a lot of time with me, which not a lot of parents have time for at this stage, or during, in this time, in this modern age. But he made time for me and worked on aspects of my game when I was very young, and set a nice foundation for me, being able to use both feet, being able to hit the ball properly. And so I would consider him a Puritan of the game as well. He doesn't get sucked into, when he watches a game, he doesn't get sucked into the atmosphere and the beautiful commentary, and he will actually assess the game as it is. So I was very fortunate in that regard, and gave me a good foundation. So there are a number of coaches professionally who also had a huge impact on my career. I met a lot of frauds, believe in me, guys who have won titles, who you then become coached by, and you wonder to yourself, how this guy was so successful. But luckily for me, I had more managers and coaches who really knew what they were doing and were quite ahead of their times as well. So I was very fortunate, and that's part of the game. That's part of your career, and that's something that a player needs is that lady luck, and to have people around you that are able to guide you in the right direction.
Yeah. And Matthew, if you had to give a word of advice to sort of youngsters out there, maybe in a small town similar to what you were, or wherever, to be honest, about how to really get to the top of their game, but also at the same time, as you mentioned now, watch out for people that may actually have a negative impact on your game. What would the message be that you would give a youngster looking to be a professional footballer?
Well, sure. I came from a working class background and a family that ended up being quite well off and middle class. So it's difficult for me to give advice to a player who comes from perhaps a different background. A lot of my colleagues who came from areas around Cape Town would tell me, "Look, Matthew, I grew up in an area where I had two options, gangsterism and football."
Yeah.
So obviously, I would encourage youngsters in that situation to take up the latter. But the more I talk to players and ex-players and coaches and people in the industry, the more I realize that talent isn't enough. The talent pool is too close. It's too compacted. So I always tell a youngster, the advice that I give them: if you want to be set aside from the rest of the pack, it's characteristics like determination, perseverance, being on time, looking the coach in his eyes and actually processing what he's saying. Things like that will set you apart from the rest of the pack. And hunger, those types of things. Work on those things, and you can't coach those things. It's inbred. So that's my mantra whenever I talk to youngsters who are keen on getting into the game.
I think, that's a brilliant point. I think Gary Neville is probably the perfect example of that. When he was coming through the United ranks, he was probably not the most talented. He had Beckham and Giggs and all these other guys around him that were so much more talented, but his sheer will and his sheer determination actually got him into that side and got him an amazing career.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's not enough youngsters who are competitive enough as well. I don't see that competitiveness in the professional game at the moment. And when I was younger, I hated losing. And obviously, there's a fine balance between being a bad loser and being competitive. But the will to win must be there as well. That's an important aspect in elite sport and in team football, in team sport as well.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us today on Sport SA Daily Diary. It's been great to chat and get some sort of insight into the back end of your career. And good luck with your ongoing coaching clinics. It's great that a former player is actually giving back like that. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, not a problem. Always a pleasure, Adam.
All right, great to chat.
Cheers, man.
Cheers. Catch us again tomorrow on Sport SA Daily Diaries, where we'll be chatting to newly engaged triathletes Emma Pallant and Jared Brown.